Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, for another very important show, very informative. This is author Stella Pope Duarte, Raul H. Yzaguirre, number 2. The complete title of this book, because it is a book. You have another sentence there. It says, seated at the table of power. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Seated at the table of power. Perfect. Before we get into this important topic, I would like to remind you that we do Facebook Live, this show. It's a radio program, of course, and it's being Facebook Lived. So I'm asking you if you wouldn't mind finding us, following us, and recommending our page. Again, it's AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. My guest today is Stella Pope Duarte, and she was just here a couple of weeks ago to do show number 1. She wrote the book, Raul H. Yzaguirre, Seated at the Table of Power. This is show number 2. So if you missed number 1, you can visit the page at AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection on Facebook, and you will find a video with the same subject that says number 1. This is number 2. Stella, thank you so much again for joining our program and to continue to talk about your book and more than that, the life and work of Raul H. Yzaguirre. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here again.
Thank you. Let's do something. Last time you were here, we focused on talking about the process and the effort that it took for you to get involved in this project of writing. I mean, Raul literally looked for you and found you, correct?
Yes,
At
that's
the
correct.
El Comedor?
It was at El
Sorry,
Portal.
El Portal, and then eventually
And
the
then
second
eventually
meeting.
the Comedor.
So it's amazing that he looked for you. So he actually had heard about you,
Yes.
and liked the way you write, and he looked for you. So that's quite a privilege, isn't it?
To me, it was a great honor.
Yeah.
And for him to be saying to me, I've heard about you and
Yeah.
seen you on television and so forth. But now I know who you are because I read Let Their Spirits Dance. That's the
Right.
book that was distributed by HarperCollins.
Yeah.
And that's when he said, you're a gifted writer. And I was standing there like, what? And he was what he was doing was empowering me.
Right.
And mentoring.
Right.
And that's what he does.
Yes.
Just as a common thing that he does for everyone.
Right. Ulises, una pregunta rápida. ¿Los micrófonos todos tienen el mismo volumen? Sí, porque el de ella está saliendo un poquito bajo, pero no es. Entonces, si todos se alimentan la misma señal, no hay problema. Yo lo controlo acá. So Stella, let's move on because we do not want to repeat what we said last week because that's already in the video. But let me ask you, because this is such an amazing thing, and let me just premise this by saying that I believe that we are the product of our ancestors, our families' experiences and history. And I think Raul Yzaguirre is not going to be the exception. So he, based on the book and our conversation, it is extremely clear that he was shaped by his family's history and by the experiences. 2 phrases that really, I think are great are the border crossed us. We
Yes.
did not cross the border crossed us. And then in your book, you even used the phrase, no hijo, nos robaron la tierra. They stole our land. Those 2 phrases are pretty powerful. And for you to have written a book about a person, a family who actually lived that concept, because we had heard about this concept of the border crossed us, but now we meet a man whose family kind of went through that. So in this first segment, and let us take actually as much as we need to, can you take us through the Yzaguirres? Who are this family? I mean, obviously they're Spaniards originally back, some generations back. Kind of take us through how they made it to what was then Spain and then Mexico and then what became Texas and obviously the United States.
Yes, it's a long history, but it started in the Basque country of northern Spain. And the immigrants, of course, came by shiploads or however they came all the way into the Gulf of Mexico and to the peninsula of Mexico and so forth, and then journeyed into Mexico and eventually joined the people that were already there. They had already, conquistadores had
Right.
already come in, and of course Moctezuma and a lot of the Aztec nation was already very much oppressed. But the Spaniards also eventually married into the indigenous people, and they created what they call the half-breeds, los mestizos.
Los mestizos, of course.
And that's who we are now, the modern descendants of these people. And we are living on this side of the border, so we are Chicanos, which still has some significance because Mexicas, if you take away the M-E, and just say Mexicas, you have an abbreviation of who we were, in the distant past. So they came in, and the Yzaguirres, his descendants, were part of Juan Pantaleon Yzaguirre. And
Juan Pantaleon
Yes.
Yzaguirre, would you say that's like 3 or 4 generations before Raul Yzaguirre, like
Oh, yes, definitely.
great grandpa, something
great,
like
great,
that?
great,
Great-
great grandfather,
got it.
probably.
Got it. Okay. So how did they make it to this area from Spain?
They would what they would do was they would start settlements, cities. They had San Antonio, they had the beginnings of El Paso and so forth. You're talking about way back in 1743.
In the 1700s.
1700s.
And we know that the conquistadores started arriving in what is now Mexico in what years? In the
1519. 1519 was when
1519.
Cortés landed in Cozumel.
So a little over 200 years.
Correct.
Could we say that the area where the Yzaguirres came to was kind of desolate? Were there people already there?
There were people, but they were, for the most part, scattered in this large area of land. And there were, of course, the cities.
Right.
Like I said, the basic cities that we know now. And when they came into northern New Mexico, the Pueblo Indians were there, the Apaches were
Right,
there,
right.
the Comanche. Well, they didn't want their land taken away from
Right.
them. So what the conquistadores and the Spanish army would do would be they would fight them. And they would
Now,
conquer them.
So whose idea was it to come? I mean, did they just all of a sudden, the Yzaguirres, what was the incentive to come this way?
I think the incentive was that there was a new land to be found. When people come like this looking for a new homeland, they're explorers.
Right.
They're people who want something better for themselves. And this is, I think, what happened with the Yzaguirres. And when they get to northern New Mexico and they move forward into Texas, the King of Spain granted land to Juan Pantaleon Yzaguirre.
So this granting of land happened when they were already here, or
Yes.
while they were in Spain still?
No, when they were already here and settled. And actually, the King of Spain was desperate to settle the lands.
Right.
Because this was New Spain.
Are you saying that the Yzaguirres in this side of Mexico, what used to be Mexico, the Texas area, were, if not the first, among the very first from Spain to come?
I would say that they had some generations that had already existed here. But they
Okay.
were certainly some of the founders
Got it.
of what we now know is Texas, but was Texas in
Right.
the Mexican
And
language.
we'll get to that word because I think it's very meaningful. Let's take a short break, if you don't mind, Stella. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. You're listening to this important show. It's a book by author Stella Pope Duarte. The book is Raul H. Yzaguirre, Seated at the Table of Power. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Amazing subject today. Our guest is Stella Pope Duarte. She's an author. She wrote a book, Raul H. Yzaguirre, Seated at the Table of Power. And we're kind of reviewing some of the content, which is unbelievable. Let us just continue. Well, let me remind you, if you do Facebook, do look for our page, AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Follow us and share it with others. We are really doing our best to increase the audience. I think these are very important topics, and I'm sure that many will benefit from it. So, Stella, let us come back. So, the Yzaguirres, several generations before Raul, the great-great-grandparents,
Yes.
they got land, you could say free land, right?
Yes.
So then, now at some point they had land on both sides of the Rio Grande, correct? But I'm getting ahead of myself. But let us kind of move from the 1700s when they come to how eventually this border crossed us concept comes in. A lot of history there. So kind of take us through what were the beginnings of the foundation for the Anglo-Saxon community to eventually even start thinking about, keeping some of that land.
Okay. Well, for one thing, like I said, it was New Spain. So it was dictated, their government and everything, by the King of Spain. So everything was ruled by whoever happened to be the king at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the concerns of the King of Spain was that land had to get settled.
Right.
And how was he going to do this?
Right.
Well, he kept pushing people forward. Go, go, go. We've got more land over here.
Right.
So they ended up going into Nuevo Mexico, into Arizona, into California, into, all over Texas and stuff. But it goes in Texas yet. It was New Spain.
Right.
So there was other names. It was right by Tamaulipas and Camargo. They were right on the border of what was then we now know as Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So as the Yzaguirres moved forward, they were granted land in Texas, which became Texas, Starr County.
Mm-hmm.
So they were given about 5,000 acres of land.
Right.
And it's still theirs if somebody wants to claim it. They go through descendancy to claim land. And there is, it's sometimes a dog eat dog, to find out where was the land that the King of Spain granted our family.
Right.
There's whole libraries dedicated to that.
Amazing.
So they settled there in what is Starr County in the Rio Grande Valley. And at the time, the Rio Grande River was called ¿cómo decían? El Río del Norte, el Río Bravo del Norte.
Just el Río Bravo del Norte. That's how they name it originally?
Yes, original.
Wow, interesting.
It wasn't called the Rio Grande.
Right.
It was el Río Bravo del Norte.
Now, so you're having this type of conversations with Raul Yzaguirre as you're preparing to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing,
Correct.
amazing.
Yes.
So that's why we said that our past and our family's past literally shapes who we are, because we hear the story, we know what they went through, and then eventually something rises up in our being, and that's eventually what happened to Raul, and then he became what we will cover in the next few shows of what he became, all the contributions, but that's going to come a little later on. So continue with the story. So how then are Americans come into the picture?
Okay, Americans, they saw the land of Texas. It was getting settled. Remember, there was still a lot of fighting going on as to whether it was going to be a free state or a slave state. And the Anglos had not gotten a grip on Texas in the early days as the Yzaguirres had moved forward.
Right.
It was still New Spain. And then in 1821, after, of course, they won their independence from Spain, it became Mexico.
Right.
So now they were not living in Nueva España. They were living in Mexico.
This is the independence war, right?
Yes.
The Mexicans in 1800. So now this is no longer New Spain. Now it's Mexico. And the Yzaguirres are still there. Right. Okay.
Presidente Hidalgo Miguel de Costilla Hidalgo. Remember, was
Miguel Hidalgo
was
y
our
Costilla.
George, the
Our-
George Washington
right. Yeah, yeah.
of Mexico.
El padre de la independencia
El padre de la
mexicana. Of
independencia.
course, yes.
And what a proud moment when he got on that, the top of the bell, where the bell was rung in the city of Dolores, in that church.
Right.
And he cried out, "Que viva Mexico."
Right.
And of course, the people were peasants, and the whole battle, they joined him with whatever means they could to fight off the Spanish.
Right.
So they thank goodness they won,
Right.
and they ended up making it Mexico. So the Yzaguirres were part of all that tumultuous history, and all they had to do was just live, and all of a sudden things changed all around them. And then after it became Mexico, then they saw something else happening, which were more Anglo settlers coming in, because
Right.
they were coming in from Missouri and
Right.
from everywhere as they moved west, because America had a concept, and it was called manifest destiny. And they felt that they were, through God's grace, everything had been given to them. The manifest destiny was,
Right.
what I see is mine. And
So they saw this as a God-given gift or right to possess. The right to possess all.
The right to
that
possess
land.
everything.
So that's happening already in the east side,
Yes.
as this is happening in Texas, what is now Texas.
Yes.
So now it's Mexico. Now, who were the first Anglo-Saxon people who kind of came to that area?
The first one to be granted land by the King of Spain was Moses Austin.
So this happened before Mexico's the independence, right?
After Mexico was declared independent,
Right.
they began giving land
Okay.
because they were again desperate for settlers to come and help them.
Okay.
But they said to the Anglos who were coming into the region, "You are going to live under the Constitution of Mexico. You will be our citizens.
Okay.
You will follow our rules." And of course, at that time, they said, "Oh, yes, we pledge allegiance to Mexico,
to the Mexican flag.
to the Mexican flag, que viva
Right.
Mexico," and all this kind of stuff, with the other thought behind their minds of, "Isn't this a wonderful place? Look at all this land. And look at all this pasture, and look at
Water.
and
Water was
water
critical.
and the mountains, and who knows what was there, whether there was metals or gold or oil or whatever, they didn't know. So they came
Moses
into
Austin is what the first person who basically came to this land.
who basically got the first land grant, which was called an empresario.
Empresarios.
Empresario.
Okay, so just like the Yzaguirres, were they also called empresarios, but now you have an Anglo-Saxon empresario called Moses Austin.
It was, I think the empresario word I noticed came in when Mexico started giving empresarios. In other
Okay.
words, we're going to give you, you're not
Like
one
a
of
businessman
we're
kind-
not
well,
one of our
yeah.
bloodline, but we're going to allow you to live in our country if you pledge allegiance
Right.
to our Constitution
Right.
and our flag. So, of course, Moses came in with, they said they gave these empresarios to someone who could have maybe 300 families that they wanted to settle.
Oh,
But it could have only been 100 or 200.
Got it.
And they were Catholic. They were Catholic families. So that also was something that was comparable with the Mexicans and Spanish, because many of
Right.
them followed the Catholic religion.
right.
So they came in, and as soon as they did, they saw that they could make something of this land. All they needed to do was own it. And so they started this whole process of wanting to own it. The year that he got the empresario, Moses Austin passed away. And the empresario went to Stephen Austin, his
son
son.
of Moses.
His son.
Okay,
And so
okay.
the city of Austin is named after Stephen Austin.
Right. And I read in your book that there was kind of like a controversy or an argument about what would be called the capital of Texas, Austin or Houston, right? Because of Sam Houston. But that comes a little later, I
Yes, it comes
suppose.
later.
Now, so now tell us about, I read it in your book, obviously, the Rangers, where do the Texas Rangers come in?
The Texas Rangers came in after Stephen Austin conceived of a way to stop in what his mind were the Mexican bandits. Because now it was obvious that they were going to fight for Texas.
Right.
You know, they saw the handwriting on the wall. They said, no, we've got to take this over. And we want it to be a slave state.
Do you believe that they basically saw kind of an organized situation there with the government of Mexico, and they basically says, we should take it. You know, why not? What's going to prevent it?
Well, they saw an advantage.
Right.
And they thought there's lots of us. There's more of us coming in.
Okay.
There's Santa Anna and his forces. And we don't know how much help they're getting from central Mexico, which was far away from where Texas was.
Right.
And here the Americans were closer together and knitted, you know, better in how they were going to handle things to take over the land. So one of the things Stephen Austin did was he thought, well, let me get some people to be vigilantes, to range, in other words, over the land, and protect us from the Mexican bandits and those that are starting trouble. Because that was one of the words they ascribed to Mexicanos, that they were all a bunch of bandits and they were always stealing and so forth. So as time went on, they began to get more derogatory towards the Mexicans.
Right.
Because before, you need to understand that a lot of the Spanish families that settled there were elitist families. These were families that were well educated.
Right.
Some of them had money in Spain, and they owned great tracts of land and ranchos, and with wonderful horses, you know, race horses and everything. They were wealthy families.
No, I read that they started like with 10 men, and then that the Rangers grew to more.
Yeah, they started with just a handful of men.
Right.
You know, and they even had their badges were Mexican pesos. They just kind of banged them together.
So
and
they were
made them
literally
into
living
badges.
in Mexico.
Yes.
And they were, quote unquote, abiding by the Mexican rules.
Supposedly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they first were there,
Yes.
and they got the Rangers. So that's where, and now you mentioned the Spanish name that the Spanish speakers would call them. Rinches, is that what you call
Rinches.
it? Los Rinches.
Los
de
Rinches
Texas.
Tejanos.
Oh, los Rinches Tejanos.
Los Rinches Tejanos. So as they lost the land, the Rinches became very prevalent. Once they saw, okay, they lost it. At first, they started forming as a way to protect the ranchers.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, as they gained power, and they said, no, this is going to be ours, and we're going to fight anybody who stands in our way. So they started getting their troops ready under Sam Houston and several other leaders that were going to be their generals and the ones that were going to lead them into battle.
Right.
And even Juan Seguin, one of our lost heroes, was aligned with Sam Houston at the time, fighting against
Mexico, pretty
against
much.
Santa Anna and everyone that was trying to battle for Mexico, because he had been living in the Rio Grande Valley and was aligned. So he knew some of the Anglo families; they were friends of his.
Right.
And he said, "Well, let me help these people."
Right.
So he started running information messages and so forth from Santa Ana to Houston and so forth. And it ended up that he started seeing that it was wrong what he was doing because they were making the Mexicanos leave at gunpoint. I mean, they would just go into a ranch and say, okay, everyone here is going to leave right now.
Right.
And they would start, formulating reasons. Okay, we've taken this ranch over. It was when they were getting the government in. You haven't paid the taxes and so forth. So they were eliminating everyone that was Mexicano as much as they could.
Right. Let's take another break, Stella, if you don't mind. Stay with us. You are listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, author Stella Pope Duarte, Raul H. Yzaguirre, seated at the table of power number 2. We'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Wow, what an amazing topic. And remember, if you're watching us on Facebook, you will see in the book right here a picture of Raul H. Yzaguirre. I am reading the book as I am preparing to carry out these conversations with the author, Stella Duarte. I am telling you, it's just packed with a lot of good stuff. And I just want to say again that we are basically influenced and shaped by our parents and grandparents, no doubt, in some way, shape, or form. And Raul is not the exception. I can tell just from kind of reading who he became, how what his family went through literally shaped him, and galvanized him into the kind of path that he eventually took. And we will get to those amazing parts of the history as well. But let's stay in developing this concept of how the border eventually crosses them, because I think we said earlier that the Yzaguirres had land on both sides of the river, so they literally were crossing the river to go to their land on both sides, and eventually they had to stay. So now, so you've took us through this Moses Austin, then the son Stephen Austin, and then the Rangers, and then the on the east, this manifest destiny is taking shape, is happening. So they're kind of moving westward, I would imagine, I would say. So then another piece of history that I believe is important to highlight, Stella, is that Texas first became its own thing. It became its own, literally a country, before it became part of the United States. Can you take us through that part of Texas becoming its own thing?
Well, Texas always felt that they were their own country. Mm-hmm. They were a republic, the Republic of Texas.
Okay.
And Houston, decided that he would be president of Texas. So there was this running ahead of things and saying, okay, this is a republic. That didn't last long, though. Okay. It didn't last long before people began to say, no, we're going to, be accepted into the union. We want to be a state. We don't want to be our own republic.
Right.
So there was a big battle going on.
But there was a space,
between
a time where they became independent from Mexico.
Yes,
that has to do obviously with the Alamo. Can you take us through those pieces of the Alamo and the San Jacinto and all that?
Well, the battles that were being fought when people saw what the plan was,
right,
that Texas would be a republic, and Mexico said, oh no. So they decided to wage war with Houston or whoever it is that wanted to challenge them.
Right.
And this is what started the whole uprising along the border, and it was very bloody.
Right.
It was very bloody because people were losing their lives. People were sacrificing everything they had, and many of the families that were living in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas were moving of their own free will because of what was happening in Texas.
Right.
And the Rinches Tejanos running around and causing havoc and chaos among the people, lynching and doing all kinds of tortures on the Mexicanos.
Let me interrupt you just a second, because I think you have in your book an element that I think is worth highlighting, the issue of slaves. And you quote there a president from Mexico, Vicente Guerrero, who happens to be mestizo, Mexican, Spaniard, and black as well.
Yes, African.
So he was obviously against slavery, and Texas or the Tejanos were in favor of slavery, correct?
That's correct. And this particular president, Guerrero, they banned slavery in Mexico.
This is before Santana, of course.
And right along the time of the Civil War, and even before the United States went ahead with the emancipation of, President Lincoln and so forth, Mexico had already dealt with that. And they were relentless that they did not want slavery.
Right.
And then they had to face that with Houston and some of the other Texans because they had big cotton plantations and other, big agricultural areas that they wanted to use the slaves.
Right.
So the battle was to be a slave state.
So that was so do you think that the reason why originally Texas didn't want to become part of the U.S., the slavery issue was a huge
big.
one? And
was
that's
big.
why they didn't want to.
Yes.
Correct.
It was big. There was a lot of money there.
Right. So the battle of which one happens first, San Jacinto or Alamo? I think
I think it was San
because
Jacinto. Yeah.
it must be the Alamo, because remember it says remember the Alamo.
Remember the Alamo.
So it must have been Alamo and then San Jacinto. So the Alamo, the Mexican army won, correct?
Well, yes, the Mexican army won there. And this is when Juan Seguin began to see that he was caught in this trap between the Anglos and the Mexicanos, and he chose the Mexicans, and he had to flee back into Mexico because
Right.
he was being threatened on all sides. So he had to flee.
So the San Jacinto battle, that's when
Yes.
the Mexican army was defeated. And then, so Texas becomes basically, you said the Republic of Texas. Texas became its own thing, correct?
For a while. And I
Right.
don't have the exact dates in my mind right now as to when exactly they remained a republic, but it wasn't for a long time before the people saw that they wanted to be annexed
Right,
as
right.
one of the states in the United States.
Right.
So there was a push for that. And in the meantime, when they began the last battle, which was 1848, the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now that was the one where it was finally in print that the Rio Grande would be the border between Texas and Mexico.
Now, when the Texas become its own entity, there were also some treaties there, right? The Velasco Treaty, I think you mentioned.
They signed the
And I read in your book
Treaty of
that
Velasco.
no one complied with the agreements
No.
of that, and that was especially that the movement to include Texas into the Union use the non-compliance, quote unquote, by the Mexican side to basically invade them.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
basically what happened.
Yes, they said they're not complying with us, so we have the right then to go and invade them. And then Pancho Villa went wild and went into one of the cities that on the other side of the border, and they said, well, we're going to chase him down too.
Right.
So now they had all kinds of vendettas and war going on because they felt the threat from Mexico trying to take back their country, and
Right.
then not to mention the indigenous people that were still fighting
Right.
for the rights to keep the country that was theirs from the very beginning.
No, so the Mexican-American War went from 1846 to 1848.
Yes.
I have the notes from your book.
Yes.
And then the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on February 2nd, 1848. So by this time, after the Mexican-American War, then Texas is annexed to the Union, correct?
Yes.
At that point.
Yes, they are now what we now understand as Texas. And of course, the Yzaguirres were just sitting in their front porches, and now they were the United States. And then this is when the battles began to, by the way, now that we're the United States, you're going to live by our rules. So every one of your cattle is going to be taxed. We're going to tell you how many herds you can have, and so forth.
Right.
So they started very strict rules and very harsh ways to deal with a lot of families that had been there for centuries. You're talking about people that had already lived there and built towns and cities and so forth.
So this is things that Raul Yzaguirre related to you, of how his family literally went through this process of from one day to the next, you are now an American.
Yes, that's correct. You're now an American. And they said, and you will have rights as any American citizen after the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. They said that they were given rights as any other citizen would have if they decided to stay there
Right.
in Texas. A lot of families didn't believe them, and so they said, no, we don't trust what they say, so we're leaving, which was in some ways a good thing because they weren't to be trusted. They didn't
Right.
keep any of those promises.
Right.
And there was people in Congress who were advocating for them and, standing up and saying, what are you doing over there in Texas? These
Right.
people have been granted rights. They said, what rights? It was
Right,
always
right.
this whole thing of we're going to do something, then we're not.
And I read in your book that even the so-called agreements were changed from
Yes.
over time, they literally changed them.
Yeah, they did. And the people weren't advised. They said, no, we don't do that anymore. Now you have to do this in order to keep your land.
Right.
And no, it can't go to your grandfather because it belongs to this other rancher who just bought the water rights.
Right.
Because water was a big deal too. Water was a big fight.
So just to name a few of the rights that the Mexicans, now Americans, were supposed to have.
Well, they were supposed to have the right to purchase land, to farm, like any other American citizen, to be able to live in peace, to be able to work. And one of the first things that happened was they put a curfew on Mexicans.
Right.
So as soon as the sun went down for those that period of years, they had to be home because they were organizing. And Gavino Morin, who was, of course, the beloved grandfather of Raul Yzaguirre, was one of the men who was organizing as well. And he was a revolutionary in his heart.
Right.
He saw the indignities and the terrible atrocities that were happening. So one night he's coming home, rushing to get home because the curfew was on. And the sun was going down and all Mexicans had to be in because they were afraid of their power. The Anglos were now getting afraid of their power. And they, a group of Los Rinches, Tejanos, met Gavino Morin coming home late, rushing home because he had a couple of jobs, and they surrounded him and they were going to kill him. They were going to hang him, in other words, lynch him.
Right.
And they were ready to do it. Had it not been for a constable, Whispering Tom Mayfield was the name of the man, and he knew Gavino Morin through his ice, delivering business that he had in San Juan, and he knew he was a good man, an honorable man.
Right.
So here comes this, who was also a Texas Ranger, a past Texas Ranger, but he stands there in the midst of these these people were wild. They were not the kind that were just gonna talk to you. They were going to surround you. They were going to attack you. They were going to drag you, behind their horses and torture you and hang you.
Right.
That's what they were going to do.
So basically, the Anglo-Saxon community became larger by far than the Mexican community. We have to go on our last break, but let me just read a little bit here. It says, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo reshaped the state of Texas and the greater part of the American Southwest, setting the boundary between Texas and Mexico at the Rio Grande and ceding to the U.S. the states of California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, most of Arizona and Colorado, and parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming.
That's correct.
A huge piece of land. Now,
and look at how much money they got.
Right.
Did you see the money?
Yeah, it's 18 million. Basically, it's, supposedly that's how much Mexico, or they paid Mexico for all this.
And then they had 3.5 million that they said, we're going to get rid of some of your debt.
Right.
And I mean, it was such a how shall I say, an unreal and cruel thing that they did to them.
So Raul Aguirre is learning all this history by his father and grandfather, and that's what basically is shaping him to be and to engage in the way he did eventually later on in his life.
Absolutely.
Let's take our last break. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. We are addressing author Stella Pope Duarte's book, Raul H. Yzaguirre, Seated at the Table of Power, number 2. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Time is running very fast. We will continue with our topic today. Author Stella Pope Duarte, Raul H. Yzaguirre, seated at the table of power. You can see the book if you're watching on Facebook. She wrote a book over 400 pages. It captures the life of the great grandparents of Raul Yzaguirre, and then it captures the history of Raul himself and how he moved on and became such an amazing advocate. I mean, so much that we will cover in the next shows. I mean, we're just kind of landing. We're just kind of setting the stage, but we will start with Raul on show number 3 on this topic. So follow along with us along this journey. And Stella Pope Duarte is an amazing writer. I think many people already know that, and that's precisely why Raul at the Portal, Restaurant El Portal,
El Portal,
went to look for her specifically. That was it a morning?
It was an event where there was a luncheon, and
Right.
like I said, that one lady came to my table and said, "Raul Yzaguirre would like to speak to you."
Wow.
And I'm like, "What?"
And now, just real quick, you brought some of those books that you've written. Just kind of show them a little bit, if you don't mind. You've written all those books.
Yes.
Fragile Night.
Let Their Spirits Dance.
Let the Spirits
for
Dance.
Honoring our veterans on the Vietnam Memorial
Right.
Wall. If I Die in Juarez.
If I Die in Juarez.
The mutilations and murders of the girls. I
Right.
went there for 3 years. And then writing through revelations, visions, and dreams is the way I do my internal business.
Okay.
In order to write. And then, of course, women who live in coffee shops, the Van Buren
Amazing,
people.
amazing.
Because the Van Buren crowd was crowd.
I'm gonna have to buy all those books and read them all. I'm not kidding you. It is worth it.
you
Let
love
us kind of end the show, and I'm gonna get a little bit ahead of myself for the next show, but it's fine. I learned from your book, Stella, that something that happened to Raul that's perhaps doesn't happen to many of our families is that the dad got to him, or got to him first. In other words, before he was exposed to the learning of the American history,
Yes.
the dad exposed him to the Mexican side of the history.
Correct.
And we're going to talk a lot more on the next show, but he basically, circumstances led him to be exposed to pictures, to stories of Mexican heroes, and that basically was the first impression that Raul Yzaguirre got, even prior to learning anything about the American history, which to me was something very special because it makes a big difference. So can you just kind of walk us in the next few minutes of how that impressed Raul, knowing the because in your book, I hope I can find it somewhere here. I have it, but basically he says that they were told that negative stuff or negative
always.
stuff about the Mexican, and so that kind of image was there, but then he got to know the truth and the fuller version of Mexican and heroes and all that.
Yes, they were told that Mexico was no good. The people were, troublemakers, and this is what they were told in school, that they were losers. That what was the use of listening to Mexico? And
Right.
here was Mexican children
Right.
sitting in the classrooms in segregated schools in San Juan,
Right.
as the North was for the Mexicans and the South was for the Anglos, and it was very segregated.
Let me interrupt you because I found a quote from
Okay.
your own book.
Yes.
He says,
His
at
words.
school, we were fed this stream of images that Mexico was poor and no good, and Mexicans were a bunch of losers. My father would refute what I was learning in school. He had a lot of insight. He was proud, a real macho in a positive manner with a true sense of honor and always proud to be Mexican, Yzaguirre says, recalling his conversation with his father.
Absolutely. And when his father would refute, because see, at school they were telling him all this stuff, and he said, "But Dad, what about manifest destiny?" And the dad was just, "What manifest destiny? Nos robaron la tierra. They stole our land.
Wow.
Do you not understand what happened?" And then, Raul started thinking, "Wait a minute, my dad is right."
Right. Let me interrupt you again. I have to read this other quote
I
from your
want
book.
you to read.
All lies, he says.
Yeah.
to Raul.
Yes.
The father, whose
All
name was Ruben?
Ruben Antonio.
Ruben. He says, all lies. Mexico should have never signed that treaty. We settled this land. They threw us out. We had our own heroes and battles and our own government. Mexico got weak and gave up. We should have never signed our land away. We would be living in Mexico right now. His father stands up and says, let's go. It's getting late. Don't believe los gringos. They only tell their side.
Yes.
This is what he literally was told, Raul, by his father.
By his father.
Amazing.
And I tell you, once you hear those kinds of things from an authority figure in your life
Right.
that you also love and are close to, you know they're telling you the truth. And with Raul not, getting that side in the school at the time, Clover Elementary. And then when he went to Edison Middle School, there wasn't enough room because the kids were overcrowded.
Right.
There was still a lot of Mexican population, some of them returning back into the Rio Grande Valley to settle again. And so they had to borrow a rented hall from a mutual society, Mexican mutual society. And Raul says that they could not touch the school, in other words, had to borrow a building.
Right.
And they could not touch anything in the building because they were borrowing it. They were renting it.
Right.
So the children were bused over there to the mutual society.
In Spanish,
mutualística.
La Sociedad
Mutualística.
Mutualista.
Mutualística.
Okay.
And so here they go into this, mutual society, Mutualística. And all around, Raul said he will never forget, all around the walls, there was huge posters of Pancho Villa, whom his grandfather, Gavino Morin, was very dedicated to. As
He
a matter of
literally
fact,
participated in the Mexican Revolution in favor of Pancho Villa, right?
yes, he did. He in favor, in other words, against the federales,
Right.
against the people that were oppressing, the rich that were oppressing the poor. Gavino Morin was all about fighting for justice,
Right.
and he taught his grandson so well. You fight for justice to the bitter end. This is who we are. And so when he sees all these heroes, Mexican heroes, he said, I've never heard about these guys.
Right. Wow.
We never read about them in school. So he started going into the library because Raul was a voracious reader all his life.
Right.
And as a child, he'd go and he started checking out books about Mexicans because they weren't teaching them in school.
Interesting.
And he said, I looked at all this and I thought to myself, someday I want to see them in our school books. And he has been one of the ones to promote that.
Another thing that I thought it was amazing that I read this morning actually in your book is that the kind of life that he lived was a very Mexican life. They had the family gatherings and the parties and the fiestas, and they listened to music, los corridos, right? Los corridos, canales, the Pancho Villa corridos, those type. And then that he was very in his home. They appreciated the Mexican actores, right? Like
yes, Pedro
Infante.
Oh, yeah.
And Jorge Negrete.
Jorge Negrete.
So basically, Raul Yzaguirre was exposed to that kind of life before he hit the schools pretty much in his own home. He got to hear of the Mexican side of the story, the Mexican heroes, if you will.
Yes, and then he saw these heroes like Jorge Negrete, that they were macho, but they also were, how shall I say, very caring. They weren't monsters.
Right.
They weren't like the Godfather, who was a gangster and stuff. They weren't like that. They had morals, although they were also fighting for the rights of the people. And that's what he said stuck in his mind. Although they were these strong men and willing to carry a gun if they had to, they were all about justice and that their people would not be oppressed. And that influenced him because he said, you know what, that's what a macho really is. Because macho, that word has a negative sense, like a macho's going to beat up
dominate the women,
a woman
for example. So he understood that macho is you have to be tough, but to serve.
Basically. And you have to be moral and you have to show love and responsibility for your family. That's
we have
a
about
macho.
a minute and a half, Stella. I kind of learned, I guess the message for today to me was we have to do a better job in teaching our children the history the history
Yes,
of
the
your own
history.
country, whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be necessarily the Mexican, but some people may be from Central America,
Of course.
from other countries. You know, whatever that country may be, it's important to teach that history to a child as well. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And to teach the pride. And like his father said, look again, listen again. In other words, hijo.
Right, right.
Don't just be moved by what you hear them say. You investigate it.
Right.
See, and his grandfather was the same way. So these men were unafraid to face any dark situation.
Yeah. So this is so critical. And I remember Frank Barrios also saying that, can you imagine if you are from another country and you don't know your history, you're basically kind of empty, and then there's not going to be that sense of pride. So Frank Barrios was saying that this is so critical to have that pride of your roots and your family, and that only comes if you are taught. And where are you going to get that taught if not at home?
Yes, at home is the best place.
Right.
And then if it's also, how shall I say, continued in a school system, my goodness.
Right.
That's going to build leaders for us that will take America to a new level.
And that's why I want to thank you again for writing this book, for taking this challenge. It's an amazing book. I think, I've read maybe 20, 30 pages, and I'm already, charged and encouraged. And just from knowing a fuller picture of history, it's unbelievable. Thank you once again, Stella. We'll have you back for number 3 soon.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll
Thank
be
you.
here.
And thank you for listening today. This is all the time we have for now. Hope you enjoy the show. Author Stella Pop, Duarte, Raul H. Yzaguirre, seated at the table of power number 2. Take care.
Contacto Total, la revista que habla, está en todo el Valle del Sol. La única revista que usted puede leer y escuchar. Levántela en sus lugares preferidos. Es gratis.
Dan ganas de leerla. Periodismo para toda la comunidad. Información local, denuncia, ayuda, inmigración, servicios y los clasificados que sí se ven. Disfrútela de principio a fin.
Contacto Total, la revista que habla. Busque la versión digital en www.revistacontactototal.com. Una revista para ver, leer y escuchar.
El encontrar un lugar con auténtica comida mexicana